All right. Well, I think we have most folks here, so we'll get started. This is a 30-minute tip session about resume and recommendation letters. It's sort of the third or fourth, maybe, in our series this summer. We're really excited about this concept because we know everybody's sort of zoomed out and there's a lot going on. And so these are very much designed to just be quick hits, give you some quick tips as you're helping prepare your application. And because of that, we won't have time for questions. They're 30 minutes, but we have some other awesome sessions this summer, mostly office hours, some other admissions chats where you can meet an admissions officer and get your questions answered. So please do sign up for those, but just know we won't be able to get to questions today, even though these are big topics with so we'll try to throw out all of our best tips. My name is Michael Lipper. If I haven't met you yet this summer, I'm excited to meet you. I'm one of the Senior Associate Directors of Admissions here at Ross. And my wife actually got her MBA at Ross back in 2015. So when we started talking about all these application tips, I think about how I helped my wife through the process and some of the things she went through. So it all feels really close to home. And it's nice to be able to sort of share some of the things I've learned over the years with all of you. Taya, how about you?
Yeah, I'm the other Senior Associate Director of Admissions and glad to meet all of you today. Michael and I have both been on the team for quite a while and seen a lot of resumes and recommendation letters come through. So we were coming up with an outline for the session and both had a lot of ideas for tips. So excited to share those with you today. A little background on myself. I did do undergraduate at University of Michigan, as did Michael. So we also just love telling people about Ross. We really believe in the brand and being part of University of Michigan as a whole. That's something near and dear to both of our hearts. So excited to get some of these tips out and hopefully have you be coming to Ross and visiting Ann Arbor this fall.
Yeah, so we're going to jump right in and keep in mind, like, reading applications is not robotic, right? There isn't this exact science to it. And so while we talk about some common themes and we look for generally the same things, we each read applications slightly differently. So we'll both just give some of our best tips and hopefully they're all valuable. 1 second. All right.
All right, so we're going to start off with the most obvious question that might be on your mind in terms of resume. We're going to start with the resume and then move into the recommendation letter for the second half of this session. So I think the most common question is, what are you looking for in a resume? And the short answer is it's going to be different for everyone. You need to think about your own impact that you've had at your job or jobs if you've had multiple positions, what those impacts have been on your teams, on your organizations, and really think about the fact that it shouldn't read as a job description. There should be something that your resume should be different than a teammate who has the same job title as you. They should not be the same because you are indicating the individual impacts that you've had. As much as you can, you want to make sure you're putting quantifiable results. So if you can put numbers, increased sales by X amount, or saved this amount in the budget, that's always helpful. We know that not everybody has those quantifiable results to share, so do the best you can. If you can demonstrate any leadership experiences that you've had, it doesn't have to be supervising people. It can be mentoring or other times that you took the lead on a team project. That is always helpful. When you can tell us about examples of working on cross-functional teams, or maybe working with diverse groups. Maybe you've had you might have been able to lead international teams. That's always really helpful for us to know because that's indicative of some of the experiences at Ross when you're going to be working on international teams or very diverse groups of people. So I think it's always helpful when you can explain those results to us on your resume.
Awesome. We thought it'd be helpful to talk about some resume logistics, right? There's all different sorts of formatting and ways you can sort of design and present your resume. And honestly, there isn't one necessarily better than another, right? But for an MBA application, there tends to be some general rules of thumb that's just a little bit more straightforward and will help you in the process. So the first and biggest one that people talk about most often is this idea of a one-page resume. A one-page resume is very much a traditional format for an MBA application. So sometimes we hear from folks that this causes a lot of anxiety or can be confusing. So just a little bit of background on why we do this. Generally speaking, career services at any top MBA program will ask you to sort of put your resume into a one-page format for recruiting anyway when you get to an MBA program. So it's actually a really good exercise to get into that one-page format now. There are some exceptions to this. Obviously, if you have over 10 years of experience and you've had a number of roles in your career where you're not automatically disqualified or eliminated from the application pool if your resume is a page and a half. There are exceptions. So don't do anything silly and make your resume sort of incongruent with your career. But generally speaking, one page is expected, and keep in mind that as hard as it might be for you, 98% of the resumes we're going to look at in an application cycle will be in that format. So everybody's sort of on the same playing field and making the same tough decisions about how to use some of the real estate on that page. Because it's one page only, be careful about, different wonky formatting things or, using that space in sort of maybe funner ways that you would in certain industries. So there are a lot of industries where folks include, headshots on their resume, or, maybe design industries where a resume is actually sort of putting forward a part of your personality and part of your skill set. Those things maybe don't work quite as well in the MBA application process. And honestly, the space is so valuable that you wouldn't want to take up some of that space maybe for other things like that. For example, you can submit a photo as part of your application and another part of the Ross application. Speaking of space, some folks sometimes include an objective, and we know that can be recommended by some people when you're trying to get your first job or make a career pivot of some sort. But it's always really goofy for us to read that your objective is to get admission to an MBA program. It's like, we know you applied. So don't waste space on things like that. Definitely want to pay attention to dates and be as descriptive as possible. And so we've seen some resumes where folks will say, from 2016 to 18, I did this. And then from 2019 to 20, I did this. But when we dig into your application history, there might have been a really big gap there that feels sort of unexplained if you don't clarify exactly when you left in 2018 or what that looks like. And think about when you're submitting your employment history in another part of that application, how it matches up with your resume. They really should match. If there's some things that don't match, those sometimes are a little confusing to us. And then my last tip, and this one's really important, is make your promotions clear. We sometimes get resumes from folks who are senior managers at their company, and we imagine if you've been there for 5 years and you're at the senior level, you certainly didn't start there, but you can definitely break out your title changes over history or the dates when those happen, because those really are compelling to us and will add to your application. So make sure those are clear.
All right. So another question we do sometimes get, but I actually wish sometimes that people ask a little bit more, is what kinds of non-professional experiences should be on your resume? So obviously with your resume, you're going to talk about your work experience, your post-undergraduate work experience. But a lot of times people wonder, how much other stuff should I be including on my resume, or should I be including that at all? A general rule of thumb is start with your undergraduate degree and work forward from there. So, you can include a couple of undergraduate experiences if you were the leader of a club or the captain of a sports team. Sometimes those things where you invested a lot of time or really built a lot of your leadership skills are helpful. You don't need to put tons of space on your resume toward undergraduate experiences, though. Sometimes I see that as a flag if I see, half of the resume spent on undergrad and the other half on professional work experience. So it makes me wonder, where have you spent most of your time and had a lot of impact? And hopefully that's in recent years. So in addition to the undergraduate experiences, the things you really want to think about are the fact that your resume is the only thing that your interviewers will see. So hopefully you'll be invited to interview and you'll get the chance to interview with one of our students or our alums and be able to see that be able, so I think it's important to keep in mind that they are only going to see your resume. So you want to think about how you connect with them. So maybe sharing a couple of passions, interests, ways that you've been involved in extracurriculars. That's always a good way to establish camaraderie between you and your interviewer, and bring a little bit of personality to the situation, where in your application you might be doing that in your essays and other places. So you want to think about that. And the other thing is, you heard on our application tips webinar to use the essays to help us understand your passions. I think that, like kind of what I was just saying is, you want to think about the resume, explaining some of the things you've been heavily involved in a couple of lines. You don't need to have a laundry list of extracurriculars or places you volunteered for the last 5 years for maybe only a few months at a time, or you don't volunteer with them anymore. We care about what drives you, and if you're deeply involved in a nonprofit or volunteering somewhere or mentoring, certainly include it, but make it clear what you're doing and what your impact is. So we understand that it's a passion and it's not just 3 words on your resume, that, we don't understand the level of commitment that you have to that.
Yeah, I'd say I'm such a big quality over quantity in this part of the process. And I think, one of the most frequently asked questions I get, so it's probably worth bringing up quickly, is, well, other MBA applications I've filled out ask me for all of my extracurricular experiences, right? And it's actually like you're submitting a laundry list of activities. It sort of puts you in that mindset. And we purposefully don't do that. And we advise folks to use the portion of your resume to share some of those. And so you're expected and more than welcome to use some of your resume to do that, but make sure to, think about the quality of those experiences that you're going to include in that space. And then just some last tips about what else makes resumes stand out, or things that I, often recommend to people. One of my favorite tips is that not every section of your resume has to be exactly the same amount of space. I sometimes think like our brains put us in this mindset, like I've had 3 jobs, so they should roughly take up about 25% each of the page. And then it's like naturally what you're doing now, you're probably having a much more significant impact and a larger scope to your work. And so the experiences that you really want to highlight and that are more substantial should take up a bigger part of the page. And so don't feel shy about if you're sort of glossing over with maybe just a single or 2 bullet points for your first job out of undergrad. That's okay. We were in the same boat where maybe those roles weren't as robust, or they were short-lived stints, things like that. And so you don't need to necessarily give a ton of space to those either. Just be really careful and mindful of the jargon and descriptions that you use for your industry. So thinking about maybe military veterans or some very, very quant-heavy finance-based roles, if you're working on some really complicated deals, things along those lines. You just want to make sure that your bullet points and your examples are can be easily understood by anybody reviewing your resume. In a lot of ways, Taya and I have done this for years, and we're fairly familiar now with what bankers are doing, what consultants are doing. So you're not doing it so much for us, but just to double down this idea of the person interviewing you is going to see your resume as a snapshot, and they might be from a completely different industry. So I think, the typical thought is your resume is going to be reviewed by people in your industry in a very specific way. And this is a little bit different in that folks who aren't as familiar with your background and what you've done are going to be reviewing your resume more for transferable skills and impacts and overall accomplishments. And so, avoiding being a little too technical in some spaces. And then I just want to mention, if you get a promotion or a new job during the application process, sometimes you hit submit in September and then you're interviewing in late November. There is a lot of time there. You can definitely submit a new resume or an updated resume throughout the process. And we do review those as part of your application. So don't feel uncomfortable if it's like, I'm not sure I'm about to get this new job. You can always update those as well. Before we move on to rec letters, anything else? Taya?
I will add, I'm seeing more and more resumes from people working at startups. And I always think it's helpful if people put 1 line of context about what that startup is, or maybe the size of it. I think that's always helpful. You don't need to spend tons of time putting context in there, But when I don't know what a company, like we're generally familiar with most companies, but when I don't know what a company is, I'll Google it. I look it up on LinkedIn. I see how many employees it has, how long it's been in existence. And if you can save me the time of doing that, I think that's really helpful to provide context. Sometimes people say, I was employee 10 and the company now has 2,000 employees. Like that really gives me a sense of how you might have helped that company grow. And everybody has a different situation, but I think that context really goes a long way.
Yeah, that's a great example that also goes for family businesses or anything sort of, really non-traditional. I think that's a really helpful tip. All right, let's go into rec letters.
All right, so if you haven't looked at our application requirements page yet, we are one of the few schools that only requires one recommendation letter. And the reasons behind that decision, we've been doing this for several years now. We really were, when we used to be requiring 2 or 3 recommendation letters, they were very repetitive. And we know it's not easy to ask multiple people to do recommendation letters, or they might not have the time, their time is limited as well. When we find that we're really getting what we need from one recommendation letter, we want to save you the time of asking multiple people and save your recommender the time of doing that. Most recommendation letters are positive. We're going to give you some tips on making sure that they are thoughtful and really helpful in the upcoming slides, but we don't need to have multiple people reinforcing the same topics. We generally believe what they say when they write that. The other point to think about is we do use the common recommendation form. So this is a form that GMAC, the organization that puts out the GMAT test, has organized. Many MBA program schools use this recommendation letter, and it's one common form. So your recommender will still need to fill it out multiple times, but the idea is it's the same question. So it'll be very easy for them to just copy, hopefully change the name of the school between the different copies, and then submit it to each school. So it just makes it the process a little bit easier, and also makes it so you know how to prepare your recommenders, because it's the same questions they'll need to fill out.
Yeah. All right. So always one of the most frequently asked questions is, who writes my recommendation letter? And then knowing the answer, being a current supervisor, usually, what happens if I don't have a current supervisor who can write one? So let's talk about this idea of why a current supervisor. I will tell you, we do put some emphasis on this at Ross. So any MBA program you ask is going to recommend usually that one of their multiple recommendation letters be written by a current supervisor generally, because at Ross, we only have one rec letter. It feels like we put some even additional emphasis on it because the anecdotes and the level of detail we're getting in the rec letter about the contributions you've made, the impacts you've had in the workplace, and what you've brought to that company are the types of things we're looking for in the process. And so we probably put even a little bit more additional emphasis on it than some other schools. When we say current supervisor, I think generally speaking, a former supervisor or even an indirect supervisor who you're reporting to, you're responsible for submitting work to, all sort of fit in that bucket that would be suitable. What we're trying to get you out of the mindset of is, other graduate school applications maybe ask for an academic rec letter from a faculty member. Those sort of anecdotes, and we see those letters sometimes, they're just not quite as helpful. First of all, they don't tend to be quite as detailed, and they generally give us the sense of what you're like as a student in an undergrad classroom. That's not as helpful insight into the process. Other folks are asking us all the time, well, should I really choose an alum of your program because that'll really stand out? Is that something you care about? And we say if it's an alum, great, but it's not something that we put any additional weight on. And we would be, really caution you to be careful not to choose somebody just because they're an alum if they're not the best person. And the same rule of thumb kind of applies to those with really big titles. Those are, my favorites. We've gotten rec letters from CEOs and celebrities all the time. And while they're fun and interesting, a lot of times those letters tend to be about the dish you brought to the office potluck before COVID happened, or just like sort of how happy you are and pleasant, but they don't really have the level of detail into the work that you're bringing to the table every day. And so thinking about, we're really looking for that level of detail. And that's why a current supervisor tends to be best. So there are many situations where you're not going to feel comfortable asking your current supervisor. The last thing we want to do is cost you a promotion or a significant bonus. And we realize that some supervisors aren't always that excited about you pursuing an MBA program because you're so valuable to their team. And so we don't hold that against you in any way. I think in those situations, if there is a former supervisor that you keep in touch with from an old role, that's a great individual. But then there are some situations where you're working for a family business, right? Or you're at a startup where you're a co-founder. And so in those cases, we have gotten great recs from clients who you're ultimately responsible for work to them, right? And so clients can give us the sort of perspective that we need. And sometimes your business partner, right? Those are people that you're really connected to. And so there are lots of options in the process. And no, I really want to mention on this slide that we get this question a lot, in that if your recommender suddenly goes on maternity leave and you don't want to bother them, or you switch companies and just realize there's a better fit to write your recommendation letter, you can reach out to us after you hit submit and change your recommender at any point in the process. It just sort of generates a new recommendation letter form. And that's completely okay. We don't question that. We don't get confused. Sometimes, this is where an optional essay would come in and letting us know maybe just why you chose that person. If it's not your current supervisor, or why you made a switch, you can let us know quickly, but those are totally okay things to do.
Yeah, so a couple tips to help your recommendation letter stand out, even though you're not going to be the one doing the final edits. I think it's important that it can stand out in a positive way. Every year we get recommendation letters that are 2 to 3 sentences long. That does not stand out in a positive way. That makes me question if they're not telling me something. So you want to, the first tip I would say to make your recommendation stand out is make sure you ask your recommender, if they're, if they have time to fill this out. I think I really like the phrase, do you have time to write me a recommendation, more than would you be willing to write me a recommendation? Because it gives them an out of, no, I don't have time for that if they don't want to. But more importantly, you want to make sure they're going to put time into this, and they're going to write more than 3 sentences. We want to see details. So it's not just about, this person stands out because they take a lot of ownership over their projects. They have great leadership skills when they are leading projects and teams. They have great camaraderie, and they build team morale and help us through really challenging times. We want them to make those statements, but then give examples that show us how you did that, and really make us picture that situation. So you want to make sure you're picking someone who can provide that level of detail, and it isn't just a bulleted list of traits that you have, or ways that you stand out among peers. So I think that's the most important thing. Make sure it's somebody who can tell us a story about how you stand out, and not just those bullet points. Do you have anything else to add, Michael?
One thing I'll add here is sometimes, I think we put a lot of emphasis in the application process about, like, every part of your application is valuable space. Don't repeat the same story, like, be strategic and tell some different stories. I think this is one area where it can actually be a little bit repetitive, and it's really helpful for you if your recommender is bringing to life your most impressive accomplishment, your top resume bullet point from a third-party perspective, and gives us the context and story of how difficult the project it was and how you led the team. That's really helpful, even if it feels a little bit repetitive that you wrote an essay about. Just hearing it from a third-party perspective can really be quite compelling. So lastly, it's just, it is totally in bounds to help prepare your recommender. It is not okay to write your own recommendation letter. Honestly, when it happens, we tend to know it. There's a certain style and cadence to some letters that just don't feel very authentic. And when you've read so many, they stand out. But you can take your recommender out for coffee or lunch and just chat with them about why you're asking them to write a recommendation and why you're pursuing an MBA. And so Taya brought up a great point, making sure they have time to write your recommendation, but this is also a good time to remind them of the deadlines. The hardest one by far is round 2 deadline for MBA applications will be right after the new year and the holidays, right? And so if your recommender is writing your recommendation letter on Christmas Eve, it might not be as detailed as you're hoping. And so just sort of staying on top of them, helping map out, okay, there's 4 schools, they have different deadlines, if they're not using the Common Rec form, just giving them some of that context, I think is really important. And if you've ever written a recommendation letter, you might know this, but it can be hard to remember somebody's accomplishments 2 or 3 years after they've happened, right? Or some of those full details. And so it's actually really helpful to remind your recommender of some of the highlights of your time at that company and some of the things that they might want to highlight. That could be really helpful just to jog that person's memory. They're so busy that it might be hard for them to not think past the last few months, especially in COVID times. And then you could also take the time to share some of your MBA goals, what you're excited to get out of an MBA program, maybe the career switch you're trying to make, or in some cases, if there's something you really want them to highlight. So a good example here is maybe you're using the test waiver, right? And so it's not as clear of how strong you are quantitatively speaking, but if you're working with budgets all the time and doing financial modeling and analysis, you might want to, mention to your recommender, hey, can you touch on some of this in your letter or some of these projects I've worked on? It's just sort of a subtle strategic way of showing us some of that skill set in a clever way. And then it's always nice to read from a recommender when they feel like the applicant is really self-aware and knows what they want out of an MBA program and why they're doing it. So all of that context can make for a really strong recommendation letter. Just as some wrap up here, because I know we're right on the time and we want to stick to 30 minutes. There's a lot more that you can do to learn about Ross in the application process. We have over 200 student ambassadors. Now is a great time of year to be reaching out to them to learn more about their experiences at Ross. And like I mentioned in the beginning, we have a lot of summer events coming up. We have other application tip type events, and then office hours is a great way to ask some specific questions and also hear great questions from other candidates and hear some perspectives from different admissions officers. And we do recommend you sign up for our managing director, Sujin Kwan's admissions blog. It's such a good way to hear in real time what's going on with our process, when are interview invites coming out, what's about to happen. And then from a different perspective, but equally helpful, our Business Beyond Usual podcast is a student-run podcast by Ross MBA students. They cover everything from what life is like in Ann Arbor to bringing a significant other to an MBA program to virtual recruiting. We hear from folks all the time that it's really helpful way to learn about the process. So definitely recommend you giving that a listen when you're working out. It's just a good way to learn some more. And Taya and I look forward to seeing you guys throughout the cycle and learning more. We wish you lots and lots of luck. We know there's a lot of steps, but you've got this. Go Blue, and we'll talk to you soon.
Go Blue.